Hello, I'm really sorry I can't be with you folks today in person, but we are going to do this video for you and hopefully it will help you out regarding cemeteries. And if you have any questions at the end of the slideshow, my email and phone number is available for anybody who wants to ask me anything about cemeteries. I am Holly Hope, Special Projects Historian with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. And one of the things that I deal with is cemeteries, offering people advice, teaching people how to take care of their cemeteries in a hands-on way. We have workshops 4 times a year in the spring and the fall that people can come and participate in cleaning, learning how to level gravestones, do basic repairs. Very, very good workshops, and if anybody wants any information about how to register for them, just email me or call me and I can put you on my list. But what I'm going to talk about today is basic cemetery maintenance issues, how to organize a cleanup effort on the ground, and documentation in the cemetery. So a little bit of everything, and let's get started. Because of the size and the bulk of cemetery monuments, a lot of people think they're indestructible, but they can be very fragile. A lot of people don't realize that these monuments you see that are large size, a lot of times they're just barely hanging on. And there can be several factors that break a gravestone's resistance to gravity. A leaning stone could have nothing adhering it to the base. All of the mortar or the epoxy could simply be gone, or the ground could be compromised underneath by armadillos, groundhogs, and just a simple touch could push them over. They look like they would be really sturdy and you couldn't get them to go anywhere, but it might be very easy to knock it over and hurt someone. When you have a cemetery project coming up, it's very exciting and you're really ready to get started, but there are some basic things to think about before getting out there. For one thing, it's best to take someone with you. Obviously, if something happens to one of you, then the other one can get help, or they can assist you with lifting or moving stones that are too heavy for one person. On the way there, if you're not familiar with the area, you might check out where inhabited houses or businesses are in case you do need to go get help. Be very aware of your surroundings. If it looks to you like there's a meth lab next door, you might reconsider or talk to the local police force to get their advice about even being there. Limp people, of course, know where you'll be. If something happens to your phone, help might arrive sooner if they know where you are. Animals are not always afraid of you when you get into their territory. Bees love box tombs and rock walls. If you're clearing away leaves, be sure to check for snakes during the season and don't sit or stand on a fire ant pile. That's obvious, but you really, you might not be paying attention, so watch where you're putting your feet. You want to use gloves and small rakes or blowers instead of sticking your hands down in the leaves. And I don't know if you can see this in the middle of the leaves there is a camouflaged snake. You might take a spray bottle with water and alcohol in it in case a dog comes around. It won't hurt the dog, but it will make them back off. Once you get into the cemetery and you pick a marker to work on, you need to inspect it closely. The first thing to do is to test the marker for stability. You want to move it from side to side, not front to back, because in that instance, it's less likely that it will break if it's a very fragile gravestone or fall on your foot. A lot of markers are made up of separate elements that maybe 100 years ago were attached with epoxy or pins, but those attachments may be long gone or the pins are snapped off. They rust, and a lot of times it's just the stump of the pin. In some instances, they never had epoxy at all. You can see from the marker on the upper left that there is really nothing holding the pieces together and they are all sliding off. That's called walking, when the separate pieces of the marker move. If you see the Lamb monument on the right, it seems to be defying gravity. Don't have any idea what's under there, but it is teetering on top of something, maybe a pile of rocks or the remnant of a base that was perhaps made with a inferior type of limestone, and it's just fallen apart and sheared off. So these types of markers need special consideration when you're cleaning or repairing. If it looks really bad, you might not want to do it. You might just have to give up on that idea, or you can simply spray the cleaner on it and walk away without scrubbing on it. The materials that are found in cemeteries will impact your maintenance methods. Arkansas cemeteries contain a lot of different materials, but there are some common types that you see most often. You see marble, limestone, granite, and sandstone. Marble is a crystalline metamorphic rock, and it was most popular for gravestones beginning in the Victorian era, 1830s to 1900. There are few marble markers that exist from the 1830s in Arkansas, if any, because during that era, most places were sparsely settled, and it was difficult to get materials to remote cemeteries. There also were not professional carvers in the area. The one that I'm showing you here in this picture is not in Arkansas, so don't get too excited, but that is in Ohio. It's more likely that you'll see marble in Arkansas from roughly the 1840s to the early 20th century, but there will be fewer examples. Often when you see death dates from that era, the gravestones were put in later to replace an unmarked fieldstone or a rotted wooden marker. Marble was also popular during the Romantic era, 1800 to 1850, because there was an interest in Greek and Roman neoclassicism inspired by architecture and statuary. Marble monuments can deteriorate because of acid rain, snow, and fog. Acid rain can cause sugar decay by attacking the joints between the crystals that make up the marble. So then the crystal grains get loosened, they rise to the surface of the marker, and they become literally like sugar grains. They can be simply brushed off. Pollution can cause a black crust in areas with a lot of industry and traffic, and this can cause marble to convert to unstable gypsum that crumbles. So the best thing to do in those cases is consult with a professional conservator. Limestone is a sedimentary stone that is often mistaken for concrete. It can deteriorate because of acid rain and water. Some limestones have a lot of faults because of fossils or tunnels made by creatures that bore into the stone. These tunnels get filled with clay that absorb water, and they don't resist frost very well, which causes cracks and failures. Often limestone is used as the base for marble markers, which can introduce problems to stabilization from the bottom up. Sandstone is composed of sand grains, and it can erode in sheets because it's layered. The causes of erosion in sandstone can be pollution or water in the layers of the stone that freezes and then forces the sheets off. Granite became very popular in the 1880s for grave markers because it was more durable. Granite is very hard, it's very dense, and it's acid resistant. Granite markers are tough, but they do slide off their bases often, especially if the base is polished granite as well, and if whoever put it up didn't put an epoxy on it. And this is not very common, but if water hits it repeatedly, as in a sprinkler system, it will fall off in little sheets like the sandstone does. Fieldstones in Arkansas are what you mostly see in those instances are unembellished sandstones. But the type of fieldstone, of course, depends on the area that the cemetery is in and what is available. You can see that these gravestones are linear, like a typical tablet stone with a square top, but sometimes you'll see rounded or triangular shoulders that rise to a point in imitation of commercial markers. Of course, most of them are unshaped and not of any significant size, but they are still worthy of preservation. They can be cleaned just like the marble ones. They can be straightened, or you can dig them out to make them more obvious. If a family wants to place a new marker with information on the person buried there, they might want to retain the original rock as well, because that's part of the story of the family. A lot of man-made gravestone materials that are often used in a more vernacular form are brick, concrete, and tile. And these are mostly connected to markers that were created by family makers or unskilled carvers. Brick is primarily seen on box tombs. Sometimes it's used as a base, but the marker might tend to sink if you use those, since the mortar deteriorates due to the contact with the wet ground. Also, they're often not attached to a base. A low-cost alternative is concrete in many rural cemeteries. They can be a cinder block or a basic hand-poured block with scratched-in information. A lot of upright concrete markers have a metal rod inside, which hastens deterioration because the rods will expand and contract in the concrete, which causes cracks and breakage. Also, if it rusts, it will expand. Other types of concrete forms imitate the typical shapes of commercial gravestones, but they're very obviously handmade. You can see that the land symbol on this marker looks like it was stamped in with a cookie cutter. These types of markers are found in several areas of the state, and I've seen clasping hands, upright hands, doves, besides the lambs. The ring of the mold is very obvious on the hand symbol that you can see on the upper left. Vernacular concrete forms are often thin, or they're laid flat on the ground, which leads to breakage and deterioration. And I just wanted to say about the stamped in symbols, if anybody has any information about where these molds might have come from, please let me know. I cannot find any information on it. They didn't appear to come from a catalog, maybe just a concrete salesman, an itinerant salesman traveling around had these molds and said, hey, look what else you can do with concrete. That I have not been able to find an instance of information on those molds. So please let me know if anybody has any information. Okay, these two examples are from Pine Bluff and Cass. They're really far apart geologically, but they both appear to be interior tile. And I really don't see that many examples of this. The issue with these would be tiles cracking and falling out of the mortar, but these have really held up very well. You can see that the tile on the upper left and then the bottom there is arranged in a style of a flower with leaves, a stem, very Art Deco treatment also on the upper left. The right hand one appears to be, it almost looks like 70s modern bathroom tile, maybe floor tile, but you really don't see that often. Cast iron is fabricated in sections which are bolted together, and these forms are becoming very rare. Let me see, let me skip ahead here. Cast iron can be thin, and if water collects and freezes in the hollowed elements, it can break the iron. Most funerary architecture in cast iron was produced by the second half of the 19th century. Sometimes you'll see them, they appear to be missing a glass window. There would be paper inside, but of course water would get in or the glass would crack. My lawnmower might kick up a rock, or just people think it's funny to break things. So it's rare to find any intact information about the interred in these types of markers. Also, you can see on the lower left that the anchor legs tend to break off, and that could be a result of heaving, you know, when it gets cold and the ground freezes up, it pops it up out of the ground, or the lawnmower. Cast iron was used a lot for fencing, which gets stolen or damaged by falling trees, and during World War II, a lot of fencing was pulled up for the war effort. Just a little aside, cemetery plot fencing was considered tacky during the Romantic era, and of course now they're very desirable. Bronze is very hard and durable, but it contains copper, which makes it susceptible to theft, especially those little detachable flower vases on memorials. And in fact, my mother's birthday plaque on her footstone was stolen before she was even buried. Today, they're used more often on slant markers, round level markers, or name plates, and columbariums or mausoleums. Wrought iron is no longer produced on a commercial scale. The peak for demand of wrought iron was in the 1860s. It was very malleable and it could be hand wrought. Today, it's actually mild steel, but people still call it wrought iron. Zinc is also known as white bronze. It was very popular in the 19th century for large, elaborate markers and sections bolted together. Zinc grave markers are brittle and they're susceptible to corrosion in industrial environments. The larger markers tend to collapse from their own weight because they're hollow. It takes very skilled craftsmen to fix the more common problems with zinc markers, so I would not suggest doing it yourself. It's best to consult with a professional conservator on these because you can solder them, but if you're not familiar with working with such a fragile metal, it could do more damage than good. Here's some unusual or uncommon materials. Petrified wood, we see that occasionally. It's not seen as often in Arkansas as in the arid West because they don't really last very long. PVC pipe is the new version of fieldstone. You see an example of galvanized pipe and steel. There are very interesting vernacular forms in cemeteries, and they're very personal and so unique. They can often be composed of found objects or made by a family through great effort. If you find an unusual object in your cemetery, it might not be junk that someone dumped there, so just keep an open mind about it. So now that you know what types of materials you find in cemeteries, you begin to think about documentation. And it's very important when engaging in a hardcore cleanup effort to document markers and landscape features. When a cemetery is jungle-like, as in this picture here, it's better to do your cleanup in increments and proceed slowly so no resources are lost. And this is actually a good idea even when a cemetery is not as bad as this one. For example, Oakland and Fraternal in Little Rock is continuously finding markers that are under the surface. So even though a cemetery may be mowed and clear of underbrush, there could be hidden resources. The number one step is to get owner permission. You don't want to have a run-in with the police or do a lot of work, then be told in the middle of what you're doing that you have to leave. So make a great effort to find the owner is what I'm saying. When you start on your cleanup, remove large tree limbs or dead trees first that are up on the surface. There could be a lot of materials hidden under those limbs that can be further damaged when you run equipment over them or walk over them. Leave broken stones where they're lying and don't go in with heavy equipment until everything has been flagged and mapped as best as possible. So flag the fragments as well. Make it all obvious where this stuff is. Learn about typical funerary plants and don't totally remove them. If they're overgrown, you can move them a little bit away from the marker or thin them if they obscure a stone or are doing damage. Jewish and African American burials often have objects on the stones. This grave on the right has seashells on it. And shells can have a couple of meanings. In African American cemeteries, they can represent the sea. The sea brought them to where they are buried, and the sea will take them back. It's also thought to represent the eternal cycle of life and death because of the spiral design of the shell. At one time, Sears catalogs offered memorial conch shells inscribed with "at rest." You can also see stones and broken glass on burials, as well as pennies or quarters. Jewish graves often have stones on them, which is linked to the idea that stones are solid and lasting, unlike flowers. Another explanation of the stones is that they ensure that the souls stay where they belong. So if you find some unusual object on the stones or next to them, don't throw them away. They could hold special meaning. Consider the configuration of field stones. If you find a row of unmarked rocks, shaped or unshaped, they are likely grave markers. When you feel that you have exposed all the apparent markers and other landscaping, you could create a map. Mapping your cemetery can be helpful to future cleanup projects. If it gets overgrown again, workers will be aware of areas that might need more care and maintenance. Also, if there is vandalism, someone steals something and you have this map, it could assist in restoring something that's still there. Mapping your cemetery, your map can be an elaborate computer-generated example, or it can just be a hand-drawn map like you see here. Maps can be used to locate markers, fencing, copings, plantings, field stones, and broken stones. Sometimes there are graves outside the obvious boundaries of a cemetery, so be sure to check all around the area. There are companies that you can hire to map for you, but it can be expensive. If you want to try volunteers, you can try geology students or STEM students because they sometimes are studying cartography, or you could use Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts to help with maps if you don't want to get really high-tech with it. Also, fraternal organizations. But don't take it for granted that these groups know all the resources that need to be included. You need to go over the types of features and what you want recorded. It's best not just to let them go and let them keep in their own head what they think it should be recorded. You may be the first one to map a cemetery, so it's very important for the historic record. If you use students, be sure to check over their work for accuracy as well. Make several copies of your map and be sure to send one to the Arkansas State Archives and or your local historical society. To take the documentation further, you can take photographs of each marker, landscape feature, and fragment. And you can fill out an individual survey form for each gravestone. You can see an example of one in our publication Grave Concerns, which is available on our website. If you have photographs of your resources, this can be very helpful in case of theft or recreating a marker after vandalism. If you can't read a grave marker, there are some simple non-destructive ways to do this. Use a mirror at an angle to shoot reflected light up into the carving. You can spray water on the engraving, shine a flashlight on the lettering from the side, or very gently wrap it in tinfoil. Rubbings are not recommended. If you look at the stone on the far right, you can see that someone doing a rubbing has just really gouged the stone. In marble, this can dislodge crystals, allow water to get in, and it can make the marker completely unreadable. I don't know what they used on that one. It almost looks like an ink pen, which is verboten. Waiting to clean until after you've cleared vegetation is best. Removing grass and limbs after it's clean could just introduce more dirt and you would have wasted cleaner. Before you clean, check the marker for stability first and remember to move the stone from side to side, not front to back. If you're looking at a stone that is severely damaged, crystals are coming off in your hand, or sheets are falling off anytime you touch it, it's probably best just to let it go, or you could do worse damage. If you're looking at a powdery sandstone, using brushes or water could remove detail. Handheld sprayers can be used. You can see in the picture on the lower left, she's using just a little squirt bottle that you can get at the hardware store. If you don't have any water resources in the cemetery, you can use those, but make sure that nothing other than water has been in it. Use brushes with soft bristles, not wire or pot scrubbers. Our workshop instructors recommend Tampico brushes that have natural bristles. Some things also that I wanted to talk about when you were trying to read the gravestones, I neglected to mention this, but shaving cream, a lot of times people will put shaving cream on a gravestone to read it, but shaving cream has oils and salt in it. The oils can stain the marker because it's very hard to totally wash them off, and fungus and mold finds it very appetizing. Also, there is salt in the shaving cream, and salt can get sucked into the marker, which will eventually migrate out, dislodging the crystals in the stone, eroding information, and breaking elements off. Sometimes people use flour. Flour can remain in those recessed areas and get wet, which can cause deterioration. Also, flour is food for bacteria, so you'll tend to get more lichen growth. And lichen has roots that can further destroy the stone. So if you use it, make sure that it's absolutely cleaned off. Use appropriate cleaning products. letter D / number 2 is what our contractors recommend, and they personally use in workshops, conference sessions, and their everyday jobs. We use 2 different contractors, and they both use this product. The Association for Gravestone Studies and the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training recommends D2. It contains no bleaches, it has no salts or acids, and it's formulated to remove natural growth. This product has been studied and tested by National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, and it is currently the most accepted product for use in cemeteries. Studies have shown that it is non-toxic and it won't harm people, pets, or plants. D2 can be applied after the stone is wetted down. You don't have to soak it, just get the pores opened up, or you can just spray it on a dry stone and let it work itself in. With this method, you can see results in about a week to a month. You also can go back once a year and lightly mist the stone again, but it just continues to work, and you can really see it working after a rain when the water has gotten into the stone. There are other products that are advertised as outdoor stone cleaners and specifically headstone cleaners, but D2 is the one that we have documentation on and references from professional contractors. With that in mind, our contractors also note that in some instances, it's just best to use a little water and that soft bristle brush. Some big box stores sell stone and marble cleaners, but those are for kitchen and bathroom countertops that have a polished surface. They also have sealers in them, which I'm going to discuss in just a minute. The bottom line is, if a product doesn't have a good documented body of research on gravestones, then we do not recommend it. You also need to know if it's safe for humans. Do you need protective clothing? Will it kill traditional plantings? So it's really best to consult information on those specific points before you use a cleaner, especially if your goal is to protect the marker, and we all know that it is. If you have a stone like this one in the photograph that is pretty much covered in fungus or lichen, you can remove as much growth as you can before using the D2 because it's less messy and it will loosen it up. If it's dry and you try to scrape that stuff off, if you have allergies, it can get in your eyes, it can get up in your nose, so it's just better to wet it. To do this, you can use a flexible plastic putty knife, a popsicle stick, or an orange wood stick from an art store or hobby store. Don't use anything rigid or metal. Like I said, wet it before removing, but don't scrape and dig. You really do not need to apply a lot of pressure. Here's some things to stay away from that are not recommended for cleaning, and this is based on years of study at National Center of Preservation Technology and Training in Louisiana and others. Bleach may make it look clean at first, but it will eventually stain the marker yellow, and this cannot be fixed later. There's also sodium in bleach, which destroys the binding agents in porous stones and erodes them quicker. That's when you get the sugaring that we talked about earlier. It's very damaging. Vinegar contains acetic acid that gets into the pores of the stone and it will actually eat it. Fossils can be removed from rocks with vinegar. Every time it rains, it reactivates the vinegar, and so it's just an ongoing process where it continues doing damage. Soaps and detergents also produce damaging salts. It may seem that paint and sealants will prevent water from deteriorating the stone, but there are always going to be areas of the marker that are touching the ground, which means that it is still absorbing water. A sealant will prevent the water from evaporating naturally, and as it freezes and thaws under the sealant or paint layer, it can cause spalling or cracking. Stone needs to breathe just like a human, and the paint will prevent the water from drying up, which advances damage. And this photo is a very good example of that. This is an extremely historic stone in the Wolf Cemetery, but it has been covered with something that looks like plastic or fiberglass, and you can see maybe lawnmowers have kicked up rocks and hit it and caused it to crack. And as pieces of it have fallen off, it's taken part of the gravestone with it. You will never be able to get that off without peeling off parts of the gravestone. You may as well just bring a big trash can and throw it away. So it's not recommended that you use that. Also, sandblasting and high water pressure can be violent to stone and remove the surface. This can cause erosion of the inscription or removal of projecting elements. Sorry, skipped ahead. If you're going to address breakage of gravestones, you need to recognize the source of the breakage so you can remove those threats. And these are examples of breaks commonly found in cemeteries. If you see up on the far left on the top, there are projecting elements on a lot of gravestones like urns or finials. That's a picture of an urn. These are commonly lost to vandals or tree limbs, or the pins that are in them, we talked about that before, that hold them on will rust and break off. Obelisks in the middle upper photo, they lose their upper sections commonly because they're so tall in comparison to the base, or again, the pins will break off if there is a pin in it. Shifting ground also contributes to the damage of obelisks, so you want to keep your base level. Just see if little animals have been burrowing under it, if there is freeze-thaw cycle and the ground is heaving. Just watch for walking to that we talked about in the very first slides. If the elements appear to be off-center and they're leaning, check that out and correct the problem. Tall, thin stones receive stresses from ground level. If the stone tilts, the pressure can cause it to snap. And marble actually will warp, which contributes to breakage. Stones like the ones on the upper right can get knocked out of their bases and broken by lawnmowers, or just by falling out when the ground shifts or the mortar breaks down. On the bottom left photo, you can see thin, flat stones. They're laid at an angle on the base, which one part of that is good because it takes it off the ground. When it's lying flat on the ground, you can see there is a recessed element to the top of the one on the left, and that creates a bowl that water just sits in and freezes and thaws, and also it gets into the inscriptions and will deteriorate the inscriptions. So what is recommended, that if you can, you need to create a 45-degree angle bed of sand and small gravel. Just layer it like a casserole. And you can lean it on that so all of the surface is supported. There's not a piece that's hanging over the edge of the base. It's all supported by this little bed that you've created. And also the water can run off of the stone and it can percolate out into the ground instead of up into the marker. The one on the right on the bottom looks like it lost its base at one time, and someone tried to prop it up to the coping around it with concrete. Well, the concrete didn't hold and it fell, breaking in two. Some breaks will benefit more from hiring a professional conservator. Working with larger markers can be dangerous, and normally it takes a few people to work on them if you're inexperienced. And if you are inexperienced, then I would recommend that if you're not going to just consult someone. Large zinc markers, like the one up on the upper left, as I said, they're thin and they corrode easily in polluted environments. To fix this issue, you can see it's just kind of melting like a cake because there is a large statue on top of that element. So the edges are sagging down. It's hollow, so it's just kind of giving way. And in the instance of something like this, it would take someone with a knowledge of working with metals and someone who can deal with those very thin elements. The lower photo shows green oxidation, and this is from the pins that are in the marker. It would be best to replace the pins with stainless steel, but this monument is very large, so it would probably be ideal to consult with a professional. If you try to remove the pins without experience, it can split the stone. The upper right photo shows a crack on a large marker. This will allow water to infiltrate, causing further damage. One way to deal with that is to inject an epoxy. Again, best left to a conservator who would know what kind of epoxy to use and how best to do it so you don't overfill it. There are a lot of inappropriate repair materials. People sometimes will use latex or silicone caulks. These are not meant to be adhesive, they're meant to keep water out. These types of caulks deteriorate in the sunlight and the heat, which opens cracks, and you can see the middle photo, there's a large crack there. This allows more water to get in, so you're just perpetuating the problem. We talked about concrete. I'm going to say it again. Concrete is harder than limestone or marble, and as the porous stones try to go through that freeze-thaw cycle, they're moving against an immovable object. This causes cracking and breakdown of the stone from the inside out. You may not see it right away, and then all of a sudden you've got a crumbled stone. The far left on the top, this is a broken stone. Fragments, like we talked about before, is laid flat in just this frame of concrete. And that is allowing water to puddle on the stone because it's flat. It can't escape, the water can't escape because it can't run off. Mortars that are not made for masonry can be too thick and they end up being too inflexible for the softer stones of the marker. Mortar can also cause the mating surfaces to enlarge, which makes joining difficult. Also, if you're not careful, you're sloppy with your mortar, it can obscure details and it just looks messy. On the bottom right, you see iron straps and pins. This is very creative, but these iron straps and pins rust, and the pins can break the stone further as you insert it. Maybe you drilled a hole and then you take your wrench and you tighten it into the stone. It just causes cracks that radiate out from this screw or whatever you're using to bolt it to the gravestone. It's best to use epoxies that are made specifically for mortar, and this is because they are elastic, they're permeable, they're durable, and they can be reworked later. There are companies that sell these products online, but you will not be able to buy them at big box stores. They do not carry the appropriate materials for that. Leaning markers become broken markers or potential for injuries. If you can see the bottom of a base, that means water can get under it. And again, that water can pool underneath, it gets wicked up through the base and causes movement of the stone. Also, pooling water causes shifts in the base and it begins to lean, like those that you see here. This is damage waiting to happen, especially if it is leaning front to back, as in this photo, rather than side to side. Small tablet markers like these can be easily straightened by one able person or with a partner, which is best. If you embed a marker into a puddle of concrete, the salt from that concrete gets into the stone. That immovable action of the hard concrete against the softer stone can cause them to shear off at the bottom. Just wherever that concrete touches that soft stone, it's going to do damage. Also, if you puddle it in the ground and then you plop your gravestone down into it, it can obscure information on maker's marks, which are usually on the bottom right-hand side of a tablet stone or an upright stone. Or epitaphs. Sometimes if you have an epitaph that has 3 or 4 lines of poetry on it and it's close to the ground, it can get covered up by the concrete. The environment of a cemetery needs to be considered as well as the gravestones. Funerary plantings are interesting and they are significant resources, but if they aren't maintained, they can cause damage. Dead trees are hazardous not only to the stones, but to visitors to the cemetery. Obviously, the ones that have potential to cause the most damage are the ones to address foremost, and it's recommended that the trees be taken care of before the gravestone. You can see that cedar tree is very close to those two gravestones side by side, and if the ground is shifting and the cedar tree is losing limbs, it's falling on those stones. And you see an example of that on the right-hand side. A large tree limb fell and just broke this gravestone in two. Vines can stain and obscure the stone. They hold moisture. If you yank the vines off in your hand, they have these little roots that look like feet, and you will dislodge crystals on marble stones. If you look at the close-up of the vine on the left, you see it's like little suckers that are stuck to the stone, and they are getting down into the cracks of the crystals. If you spray herbicides in a radius around the stones, that introduces salts. Also, you've gotten rid of the grass. So dirt splashes back on the stone, injecting the herbicide into the stone over and over. Shrubs that are allowed to get too big in close proximity to a stone as they grow can push it off the base. That's what the one on the left was doing, and I didn't think about it. I pushed it back before I took a good photo of it to show you what not to do. Also, the fruits and leaves can scrape against a stone as the wind blows. It causes stains, and you can see it's also causing this stone to become discolored. When you have a gravestone like this that has these elements, this scrolled element there, it creates a trough. And in this instance, cedar leaves have gathered in there. When you look at the same marker on the right after the cedar leaves have been removed, you see the impact of that water. And that's true with fruits and vines, just fruits and berries that collect in there. They cause discoloration too. Tree roots are going to keep growing. Your gravestone may have been installed a foot away when it was a little tiny tree, but now it's a big tree, and the gravestones can be swallowed up by it. Pieces of fencing can be swallowed up by it. So you might just want to keep an eye on these large stones and how it's impacting, large trees and how it's impacting the stones. It's not bad. If you have a stone from the 1800s, there is not going to be much left in the ground directly in front of it. So if you move it over an inch or so, I'm not talking picking it up, moving it across the cemetery or several feet away. If you just move it away from the radius of the tree roots, then you will likely save it from getting swallowed up by that tree. You also want to consider proper maintenance equipment. Maintenance equipment does a number on gravestones. You can put bumpers on lawnmowers. You can get like a pool noodle and split it and attach it to the bumper, and that will keep it. If you have to ram it into a gravestone, that will help it in a small way. But the recommended thing is to use weed eaters with the thinnest trim line available. Also, don't bump it up against the gravestone. If you see the picture on the bottom left, you can see striations from the thread of the gravestone. The one on the right has probably been bumped with a lawnmower. As I said, bases are often composed of a different material than the part that's on the top, which we call the die, D-I-E, and it may come from a different quarry. This quarry may have inferior veins of limestone. It's not often that a base is marble, but it can develop cracks and chips, but this, to me, looks like a lawnmower problem. So that is cemetery maintenance and basic issues that you need to address in your cemetery. If you have any questions, please email me or call me. I'll be glad to help with anything. If you're interested in getting your cemetery listed on the National Register of Historic Places, then I can put you in contact with the correct people. If you have questions about materials, I can get you in contact with the professionals. If you want to register for one of my workshops, please get in contact with me and I will let you know when and where. Thank you.